Welcome to Wild Things 2021, Eden and Evanston, the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary. We're going to share with you some of our experiences initiating and maintaining a natural area in our community and how our roles, goals, and perspectives have changed over our first 5 years. I'm Julie Dorfman, Co-Steward of the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary. I'm joined by Joan Linsenmeier, beach volunteer for over 4 years, newsletter editor, tour guide, and website contributor, and Jerry Herst, Co-Steward of Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary, who handles supplies, finances, spreadsheets, website documentation, and more. I'll be giving a brief history of the project. Joan will address lessons learned and our expanding focus and mission, and Jerry will be our quizmaster. The Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary is at 1811 Sheridan Road in Evanston, Illinois, just south of Northwestern University. It is one of more than a dozen in a chain of nature oases where migrating birds stop over along the Illinois shoreline from the Indiana dunes into southern Wisconsin. In the 1960s, Northwestern University created an extensive landfill to expand its campus out east into Lake Michigan for future development. A wire fence separated the beach from an untended wild area. Sand-loving plants moved in, cottonwoods, sandbar willows, silverweed, little blue stem, switchgrass, and horsetail, among others. As the plants grew, the birds came, and then the birders. On a good day in spring, a bird watcher might see indigo buntings, yellow or Wilson's warblers, warbling vireos, maybe a chat, brown thrashers skulked in the leaf litter, orioles nested in the cottonwoods. It was a bird and birders' Eden. When Northwestern University built its new visitor center in 2013, the most mature half of the wild area came down, and this precious refuge for migrating birds was lost. Northwestern paid a fee to the city of Evanston for each Evanston tree removed, a total of about $173,000. Members of the Evanston North Shore Bird Club suggested setting that money aside to create a new bird sanctuary and worked with the city's greenways team to make this a reality. A professional landscape team headed by Kettle Camp and Kettle Camp was hired to design and plant native vegetation on the beach. This area incorporated a small remnant of the original woods, plus about 2 acres of sandy beach adjacent to the city park and jogging path. In fall of 2015, Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary was born. It was a partnership between the city of Evanston and the Evanston North Shore Bird Club. Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary was technically not a habitat restoration because there were no records of the original duneland conditions. It was to be a bird sanctuary. Our task was to create an environment that would provide food, water, and shelter for migrating birds and to enhance the enjoyment and learning of Chicagoland birders. In 2015, Judy Pollock of Chicago Audubon Society had asked my husband, Jerry Herst, and me to steward this new bird sanctuary. We agreed, but only if Judy and Libby Hill, who had spearheaded the project, would be our mentors. Libby and some friends had already begun to work that fall, pulling up large bags of garlic mustard, a non-native invasive weed. There wasn't much more to do that fall, but we'd get started in the spring. The new plantings at the sanctuary had been carefully designed for a plant structure that would welcome migrating birds, but we had a lot to learn about both the new plants and the non-natives that had already established themselves in the area. In fact, the previous weedy residents, garlic mustard, quackgrass, bouncing bat, black locust, wild grape, sand burr, ouch, were the ones that really thrived in those first few years. In the spring of 2016, we were given a map of the site from the landscape architects, including a list of about 19 species that had been planted in 2015. Native trees, shrubs, forbs, and grasses, 4 or 5 of each. We walked the large open area and identified several of the wildflowers and a few of the woody plants. Using field guides, we keyed out most of the shrubs and several trees on site. Judy and Libby helped us identify some of the non-native invasive plants that they recognized from other projects. but neither of them had ever worked on a dune or sand restoration previously. Fortunately, Judy knew several habitat restoration specialists who graciously came to visit. It was an unusual sight, they told us, because the beach had been mechanically groomed for years. In addition to the wild remnant, the beach included a tiny strip of weedy former parkland, a large open sandy beach. Our consultants were extremely generous with ideas of which plants to try, but basically said, this is an experiment. It will be very interesting to see what grows here. Native plants support native insects to feed the birds. Those insects also pollinate plants to produce the seeds and berries that sustain migrating birds in the fall. Our long-term goal was to have only native plants at our site. We knew that invasives would crowd these out, so our first task was to pull or dig aggressive weeds. We put together a steering committee, rounded up several members of the Evanston North Shore Bird Club and some friends, and scheduled a work day. In spring of 2016, aside from Kettle Camp's fall plantings, the area near the walking path, which had been parkland, held a rich seed bank from previous years. We soon learned to recognize bouncing bat or soapwort. It has a distinctive spring rosette, and little did we know that this pretty European flower, first identified in Evanston in 1875, spreads like crazy via woody rhizomes and sets lots of seed. It took us another year to understand the depth, up to 6 feet, and the size, up to 3 inches in diameter, of these red woody roots. Over the past 5 years, we've devoted hundreds of hours pulling, snipping, digging, and even hiring an outside habitat contractor to help us and our volunteers get rid of it. And we're still in the managing and learning stage. Judy also identified quackgrass for us, another Eurasian plant with extensive rhizomes. Digging it with both trowels and our fingers, we were astonished by the rhizomes. Soft, slim, root-like structures that develop a node about every inch. Each node can sprout into a new plant, and they grew faster than we could dig them. We had work days where we held contests, and volunteers sometimes pulled a quackgrass rhizome longer than they were tall. In spring of 2017, realizing that the quackgrass was getting ahead of us and invading the open sandy beach, we turned to Evanston's professional greenways team to help control it. They began treatment in 2017. Alas, we were too late for good control that year. We purchased and planted another 400 marram grass plugs instead to put a literal line in the sand to keep the quackgrass from spreading east. Luckily, extra community volunteers came to the rescue and worked with us on special projects like this. Also in 2017, bird monitors started to document seasonal migrants and documented it all on eBird. They were community scientists. Maybe we could be too. We started our own plant lists. We tracked the plants that we could identify by both Latin and English names, where we had first seen them, what year we first saw them or identified them, and whether they were native or invasive. Using the Flora of the Chicago region by Wilhelm and Raricha, we began to learn which plants are natural associates of each other or might do well growing in particular conditions, and the conservation values of the native plants that we have or might want to introduce. We began to plan new plantings for the open areas. Evanston nature lovers had also started to notice our work. We had made arrangements to receive donations through the Evanston North Shore Bird Club and now had funding to plant more trees, shrubs, perennials, and grasses. The Rotary Club International's Green Team, which is headed in Evanston, was raising money that year to plant trees as part of their climate change initiative. Serendipity, we had a large area that was quite bare. Jack pine, a Great Lakes native, seemed to be doing well in other areas of the sanctuary. So we selected it and asked the nursery owner at Possibility Place about the native shrubs that would be compatible with jack pines. Our volunteers donated extra money to plant those associated shrubs, sweet fern, New Jersey tea, and sand cherry, which all did well. Our volunteers also thrived. We fell in love with the site, with sunny afternoons by the lake, with discoveries of new plants. We were especially delighted when we found new native forbs that had established themselves spontaneously, such as horse mint, butterfly weed, and wild trailing bean. We had a good time. 2018 was a big planting year for us. In spring of 2018, the Greenways team succeeded in controlling the quackgrass with early and repeated herbicide treatments. This was much more successful, but left us with a mat of about 6 inches of thatch. Oh no, more digging. We also had made enough progress in removing other invasives to begin our new natives plantings. We had defined one particular area as needing additional shrubbery for bird habitat and biodiversity. The native shrubs planted in 2017 were doing well, and we had sources for additional associate plants. Many Evanston residents had generously donated funds in memory of or in honor of loved ones. With several community groups committed to one-off large work days, we started planting. In 2018, we installed over 600 new plants and logged in over 1,000 hours of volunteer work at Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary. Our lovely sanctuary was starting to fill in and green up. Insects. A new volunteer joined us who loves bugs. As new native flowers matured, the variety of butterflies, dragonflies, and bees expanded. They developed a species list of insects and arachnids that soon exceeded 50 species. Gradually, we learned to know and care for the land. We saw which weeds we could manage and which grew faster than we could pull. We observed which birds made use of which trees, shrubs, or other spots. We observed eastern kingbirds visiting our red osier dogwoods in the spring and coming back to feast on their berries in the fall. Baltimore orioles built their nests in our giant elm trees, and for several years in a row, warblers made good use of hawthorns and ashes. Wherever we could, we tried to enhance the bird's habitat. A couple of our volunteers even used fallen branches to build brush piles. The migrating sparrows, thrushes, and catbirds loved them. 2019 was a good year to step back and observe. We still had plenty of weeds to pull, watering during drought, identifying special South Pan area plants. But our Duneland adventure had now grown to include diversifying our dune grasses in open areas and more sand-loving perennials, which we put in a shady area that had persistent weed problems. The original landscape design included marram grass and sand reed grass. These two are typical pioneers or first to appear along Great Lakes beaches. We learned about other dune grasses that had appeared spontaneously, such as wild Canada rye, little bluestem, and switchgrass. Early on, we had noticed that a short dune grass came right behind the marram grass when there was bare sand. And botanists up at the Chicago Botanic Garden helped us identify Triplacis purpurea, or purple sandgrass, a good native. In the south area, another short grass appeared, June grass, a plant of high conservation value. In fall of 2018, it had appeared near the beach house, and in 2019 further north. We are now trying to introduce it with some other short dune grasses into our open areas. We have gathered seed from native grasses and forbs in the fall for several years. We tried to spread them at winter's first snowfall. We also occasionally purchase plugs to fill in the bare spots and enhance the grass diversity. In 2018, 2 new plants spontaneously popped up where we had removed that troublesome quackgrass. Hidden grass are Spirabolus cryptandra and rough sand sedge, or Cyperus schweitzenii. Both are known associates of our evening primrose, horsemint, and several other of our favorites in the upper dunes. It's always fun to find a new friend, and especially when a professional botanist tells you that's a good plant. There's also more invasive cheatgrass to tackle and a few others that we haven't identified yet. But the biodiversity of our plants, now close to 150 species, keeps expanding and now supports 193 species of birds. In a wetter area south of the beach, the steward of Montrose Beach observed sedges, rushes, and other wetland or panay species growing. She introduced us to this very different and fascinating subhabitat, encourages us to attend to them as well. We have pulled some white sweet clover and dug out some common reed or phragmites there, but mostly we just observe and document this special area. Winter of 2020 brought huge storms and lake level rise with major sand shifts at Clark Street Beach. The water level rose approximately 3 feet, and we lost maybe 30 feet horizontally of shoreline, along with the fence that had defined the bird sanctuary property. The city rebuilt in early spring, only to have the lake come up and destroy the fence 2 more times. Shrubs, grasses, and even whole jack pine trees that had previously been within our sanctuary were alternately buried in sand or later carried out to sea. Beavers took down several large cottonwood trees that were exposed when the fence was destroyed. We also had a lot of trouble with rabbits eating newly planted and apparently delicious native plants. This November, as the beavers prepared for winter, they came back in force. Beavers typically harvest trees and branches in the fall, float them to their lodge, and store them underwater to eat the inner bark in the winter. All 17 of the large cottonwood trees that had been outside the new fence were gnawed down and presumably swum up the lake to Northwestern Lagoon. Did you know that an adult beaver can harvest an entire adult mature cottonwood tree in one night? Within a few days, the beavers had gnawed through the wooden snow fence and harvested another dozen trees. Panic. Fortunately, Libby organized our amazing crew of volunteers to come to the rescue. Sporting masks and gloves and physically distancing from each other, they have reinforced the existing snow fencing with metal mesh and installed mesh around each of the approximately 100 cottonwood trees remaining within the sanctuary perimeter. A couple of weeks later, another busy beaver came and got through another part of the upper fence and came in and took out another cottonwood. The city sent a crew to work with our volunteers to install an even wider and heavier mesh perimeter. Our 5 years of building community among our Evanston volunteers and with the city of Evanston has been invaluable. While the beavers do cause damage, they are part of our natural community and loved by many. The beavers even made the Chicago Tribune and the Evanston Roundtable on December 29, 2020. As this is written, we have also begun conversations with Evanston Greenway staff, Evanston's forester and wildlife manager, and Northwestern's community outreach person to explore future wildlife management planning for our neighboring and interactive habitats. And Joan will now tell you more about the lessons we've learned and our expanding mission and focus.
Hi, I'm Joan. Julie has given you a history of our 5 years of work on our site, and I'm going to talk about some of the many lessons we've learned from that work. The first point on the slide, that we can't predict the future, is of course something that we all knew already, but I'm going to share with you some of our approaches to making good guesses about how our actions might affect the future. Then I'll highlight some key things we've learned about plants, about birds, and also about people. Especially because, as Julie noted, our site is unusual, sometimes we just have to try to make good guesses and see what happens. And to make good guesses, we use a range of different strategies. One strategy is to consult print and online resources. We've used a variety of field guides, including the one Julie already mentioned, and some others as well, and several different websites. The photo on the right is from IllinoisWildflowers.info. We also have used MinnesotaWildflowers.info and the website of the Missouri Botanic Garden, and in addition, some more general sites not specifically focused on the Midwest, such as iNaturalist and Picture This. We've received invaluable guidance for our work from talking to other people who have more experience and more expertise than we have. Stewards for other natural sites in the area have been very helpful to us, sharing their firsthand experience with some of the questions we face. We've consulted with them and also sometimes visited their sites, and some of them have been generous enough to come to our site as well. The Evanston North Shore Bird Club folks are our go-to experts for guidance on birds. For additional guidance on plants, we've consulted with professional botanists and with nurseries such as Possibility Place. We've also worked with City of Evanston staff, which is not surprising since our site is on city-owned land. And finally, the Chicago Botanic Garden and the Morton Arboretum are, we've learned, good places both for finding experts to consult with and for taking classes, which also helps us to become better informed ourselves. As we've spent more time at our site and read more and taken classes, we've been learning more and more and gaining a lot of expertise. And an important tool for gaining expertise through working on our site is documenting what we're doing there. Keeping track of what we did or what we discovered and when helps us learn and can also be useful for seeking funding and for attracting new volunteers or consultants or students who might want to work on our site. Documentation can take the form of photos or spreadsheets like the plant list that Julie showed you, or minutes from our meetings. The city asked us to keep track of volunteer hours, and so Jerry set up a volunteer spreadsheet, which helps us keep track not only of who worked each date and for how long, but also what they did. Among other benefits, that provides a record of when in the year different plants came up, when we pulled different things, and that's helpful for planning work days in subsequent years. This particular worksheet shows you that on September 24th, 2020, we planted Western sunflowers in certain areas of the bird sanctuary. And the photo on the right, taken a couple weeks later, shows you that some of those sunflowers marked with yellow flags did quite well, and other ones turned into food for the bunnies. We've learned broader lessons about plants too, besides that some of them are food for bunnies. We aim for plants that are native to the Chicago area or to the Great Lakes region, but not just any native plant will do. For one thing, we have lots of different sub-habitats within our 2+ acres. Some of our areas are lush, some are sandy, some are forested, some are more swampy. And we've found that even adjacent areas that can look just the same to when we look at them can have different soil and consequently different things grow there. So our different areas we've learned support different though overlapping species of plants. We've also learned that removing plants and getting them ready for planting new natives is a lot of work. Related to this, because it's so much work, we've learned that if you're going to go to all the work of taking plants away from some area because you don't want them there, you should really plan what it is you're going to put in instead. If you take things away that you don't want and leave a bare area, something else you don't want might sneak in. It's exciting when new plants come up on their own, but you need to figure out what they are and whether to celebrate them or remove them or control them. We've already talked about the invasive bouncing bet, an early arrival that we've worked on removing and controlling, and an ongoing challenge to us. On the right, you'll see the wild trailing bean. That's a native plant that first appeared in just a few spots and then spread itself more broadly across our area all by itself. Plants also surprise us through the ways that they interact with the rest of our environment. For example, we knew that some insects have only one host plant for their larvae, such as the monarch butterflies and milkweed. We've also, though, seen many different pollinators or butterflies have nectar from a single plant species. And here you can see an array of colorful butterflies on our blazing stars, or liasis. Of course, because we're a bird sanctuary, much of what we've learned has to do with birds, and I'm just going to mention a few points here. All of our planting decisions, whether it's selecting plants or laying out the site in general, take into account the impact on the birds. In the field, however, we found that we actually focus less on birds than we'd expected to. In fact, in some ways, habitat restoration and bird watching can seem almost incompatible. Our habitat work is often done during the day with big groups laughing and making noise together, but the birders often go out early in the morning or at dusk, singly or in small groups, and try to be quiet. Of course, when we're working on plants at our site, we also are always on the lookout for bird movements and sounds, and we do take breaks from the plants to appreciate the birds and then try to refocus on our digging and planting. We feel very lucky to be collaborating with the Evanston North Shore Bird Club. They're the ones who coordinate the bird monitoring at the site and post their findings on eBird, where the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary is a hotspot. I also want to mention some of the things we've learned about working with other people, especially with our volunteers. We found that the best way to train new volunteers is to teach one plant at a time, to have a target plant for the day. It's great to have a brief anecdote about Eurasian plants that we want to remove. For example, people may be more intrigued with working on bouncing bet if we tell them it's also called soapwort, and it has that name because it was used for doing laundry in England, and it's in the Midwest because it was brought here on purpose. Or we can tell them that the garlic mustard we're going to be pulling someday can actually, if they want to take some home with them, be used to make a spring pesto. It can be good to give people an example of a target plant that they can carry around with them for comparison. For example, on the left is prickly lettuce. If you hand people a leaf from the prickly lettuce to carry around when they're going to be pulling it, it helps them keep in mind that not every tall plant with a big leaf is a prickly lettuce, and if the leaf doesn't look like this, then they should leave it where it is. New volunteers can also be paired with experienced folks whom they can ask for help and also get to know a bit better, which might encourage them to come back and work with us some more. As people do come back, you can teach them about additional plants. And a very important lesson we've learned to include whenever we're teaching about plants is if you don't know what it is, then don't pull it. Something else we've learned about working with people is that volunteers aren't interchangeable. What we can accomplish is related to who's there with us that day, and we've become better at tailoring work to people's strengths and interests. For example, we have one volunteer who needs to stay out of the sun, and she's a terrific asset to have there when there's weeding to do under a shade tree. We have volunteers with different prior knowledge and who bring different skills to our site, and we've benefited in different ways from our bug expert, as Julia said, also from experienced writers and photographers, and from a handyman who's great with tools and was able to fix a fence for us when the city didn't have time. Sometimes volunteers suggest new projects, such as the brush pile Julie talked about. And for projects like that, it's great to have volunteers who are okay doing some heavy lifting. Looking back over our 5 years at our site, it's clear that our focus has evolved. Our initial goal was to create a bird sanctuary, and that's certainly still a primary focus, but now we view our mission much more broadly. For one thing, it's not just about birds, it's about the interconnected natural environment, birds, insects, plants, and even some mammals. This also goes beyond the environment at Clark Street Beach, and we've come to see ourselves as part of a network of Chicagoland natural areas supporting each other and working together. We're excited to report that Evanston now has an official city-level natural areas designation, and that we helped to make that happen. Also, the beavers have stimulated us to work more closely with Northwestern University and the City of Evanston staff, and to think more broadly about how people and other animals can live peaceably together here in our urban environment. Also, beyond focusing on birds and plants and bugs and beavers, another important focus for us is people. From the beginning, we were aiming to provide a good experience for local birders dismayed about the loss of a key birding location. Now, though, another focus is on reaching more people in our community through outreach and education. Some of that happens on location. We're located along a very popular biking and walking path. There often are lots of people going by. And on the other side of our area, there's a beach volleyball court. So these provide excellent opportunities to intrigue and educate passersby. That happens in part through our kiosk, where we have general information about our site, and we also update that regularly with information about, for example, a bird of the month. The signs you see here on the fence relate to recent plantings, and the plantings are marked with flags. The signs here tell passerby what plant species each flag color marks and a little bit about that kind of plant. We also educate other people through informal chats over the fence, which is actually where the idea for the signs came from. Lots of people looked over the fence when we were working at the site, and they asked us, what are those pink flags? What are those yellow flags? What are all those colored flags for? And so we responded not just by answering there, but by making signs that answered that question. On our side of the fence, we do outreach and education through tours. Some tours are for the general public, and we've also done tours for particular groups, such as the Rotary International, which has been generous with donations of both trees and volunteer hours. Outreach and education also happen through our website and our newsletter. The website includes information about the bird sanctuary and documents some plants and animals found there. And it also provides information for people who might want to volunteer at our site or make donations. We launched a newsletter this fall, and it went to city officials and to our volunteers and to others in the community. And we hope to do a new issue about 3 times a year. Another kind of outreach that we do is trying to get more people to work at our site. So far, much of the outreach has happened through personal connections, though we also have volunteers find us through our signs, websites, and over-the-fence chats. Active recruiting is pretty much on hold for now due to COVID restrictions, but we're thinking about how to attract a more diverse group of volunteers going forward. Finally, we've discovered the social emotional benefits of our project for the regular volunteers. We've come to really treasure our time on the beach and the friendships we've made or renewed there. As a personal example, Julie and Jerry and I met when our children were in kindergarten together. Those children are now in their mid-30s with children of their own. It's been a long time since we worked together on the school PTA, and it's very good to be working together again. During this time of COVID-19 restrictions, we're especially grateful to the city of Evanston for keeping the beaches open and for allowing us to work outside, physically distanced, making what we think is a positive difference in our world. Back to Julie now.
So in conclusion, there's always more to learn. Expect to make mistakes and try to learn from them. Delight in new discoveries and share them with each other and the public. That's you guys. This special opportunity to help restore the earth is beyond anything any of us dreamed of when we first started. What a gift. And we would like to acknowledge that we could not have accomplished what we have done without the help of many people, just a few of whom are listed here, as well, of course, as our loyal and willing volunteers. And now for our quiz.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the quiz. If you get 5 out of these 7 questions correct, you will get a prize, which we'll tell you about at the end of the quiz. Question number 1, which tree did the landscape architect not plan to add to the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary? A, black oak, B, black locust, or C, black cherry? Put your answer in the chat. We'll give you the answer in a bit. Which grass that appeared without being planted thrilled the stewards at CSBBS? Common reed, the Phragmites, quackgrass, June grass, or cheatgrass? A, B, C, or D? How many trees did the beavers take out of the bird sanctuary in 2020? 3, 10, 30, 100, 300? How many trees? Why is there a fence around the bird sanctuary? A, to keep the birds in? B, to keep the birds out? C, to keep the plants in? D, to keep the volleyball players out? Which of these beautiful flowers is not a Eurasian native? Bouncing bet, garlic mustard, or rough blazing star, liatris? Which bird does not regularly appear at Clark Street Beach? The ivory-billed woodpecker, the red-tailed hawk, an eastern kingbird, or the Baltimore oriole? And now for the last question. Why do beavers come to Clark Street Beach? A, the open beach is sunnier and warmer than the lagoon. They come because they just like to sun themselves on the warm sand. Or B, beavers like the inner bark of cottonwood and willow trees. They gnaw through the bottom of the tree, let the wind blow it over, and drag the felled tree back to their den at the northwestern lagoon to store underwater for winter food. Or C, beavers like to meet under the full moon in an enchanted forest. The remnant woodlands from Northwestern's Lakeville provide a perfect mating ground for the 2-year-old beavers. Okay, the answers are, quiz question 1. Which tree did the landscape architect not plan to add to the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary? The answer is the black locust. Question number 2. Which grass that appeared without being planted thrilled the stewards at CSBBS? And the answer is June grass, Calaria macrantha. Question 3. How many trees did the beavers take out of the CSBBS in 2020? The answer is C, 30 trees. Question 4. Why is there a fence around the bird sanctuary? Well, we hope you figured it was to keep the volleyball players out. Answer D. Question 5. Which of these beautiful flowers is not a Eurasian native, an Eurasian invasive? The rough blazing star, Liatris aspera. Question 6. Which bird does not regularly appear at CSBBS? Why, it's the ivory-billed woodpecker, which hasn't appeared anywhere for the last 30 or 40 years. And question 7. Beavers do like the inner bark of the cottonwood and willow trees. Answer B. They might like to sun in the lagoon and on the sand, and they might like to mate during the full moon, but we don't know that. So, did you get any of those right? If you answered 5 of the 7 questions correctly, you've won. Contact us through the link at www.clarkstreetbeachbirdsanctuary.org. For your prize, we'll send you a fair trade chocolate bar. And thank you for attending our presentation. Hello, everyone. I think Brandon will come on shortly.
Hi. Hello. Thank you, everybody. I have to say, just personally, that when we were recording the session, I laughed out loud at the idea of the beavers meeting under the full moon. So I was looking forward to that coming back as we were watching it today. We had some great questions, and we have some time for some great questions. And I do want to encourage everybody, that if you did get 5 out of the 7 questions right, do definitely go to the website, www.clarkstreetbirdsanctuary.org. Is it .org? We'll put it in the chat.
Clark Street Beach Birdsanctuary.org.
Perfect. Thank you, Jerry. So we had some great questions that came in during the session. Let's start with this one. How many microsites are there in the sanctuary, and how does this affect where you plant and which birds and insects are present?
I listed out some of our microsites. We have upland dunes. We have lower sand beach. We have a remnant of odds and ends of trees that can live in sandy areas. We have a cottonwood savanna that's a more open land with mostly cottonwoods. We have an artificial pond that was put in area one that has a rubber liner, but has supported a fair number of native wetland plants. And we have the pan or panay in the south end, which has a lot of rushes and sedges and wetland plants that are specific to a pan or panay. Is there's a dune and then there's water behind it, and it has some very specific plants. So that's 6, I think. And then there's some old parkland with all kinds of weeds.
But you have to understand, we're a very, very tiny spot.
Yeah, the whole thing's only about 2 acres.
2.5 acres. So there is variation, but and the birds like lots of different places. And we are fortunate enough, as mentioned, that we have bird monitors who do keep track of birds and report that on eBird. And they also let us know in what areas the birds have stopped at.
What affects what we plant and which birds and insects are present. The Wilhelm and Raricha, partly is we see what's there already and what's doing well, but Wilhelm and Raricha tells you what kind of a habitat different plants will live in. So often when we find a plant that has come spontaneously, we'll look it up in Wilhelm and Raricha, and it will tell us other associates, other plants that would typically grow near it or with it. And then those will be the ones that we will try to introduce if we have access to them. And again, the bird monitors give us some feedback as to where they've seen birds, and we of course go and see where we see birds, but the flowering plants have been particularly interesting in terms of which insects make use of them. There are certain kinds of digger wasps that like bare sand, and then we will see them in the liatris. And our bug expert, Callan, helps us sometimes with that. Mostly if we have lots of flowering things, we have more birds and bugs.
If I can add one point too about that, this is also an area where just trying something and see what happens is partly what we have to do. And one of my favorite examples is how we had, like the red osier dogwood was planted in 2 places, which you might think were identical. And yet the plant did much better, grew much more in one spot than in the other. So sometimes we're not sensitive to what the differences are, but the plants are sensitive to them. And we can then figure out, how come it worked better there than it did there?
And Kathleen Garness has noted the link to the Field Museum Guide to Dunesland Flora. She has actually illustrated a beautiful black and white line drawing of duneland plants, and it tells you which ones grow in different areas and organized by woodies and forbs and grasses and so on. And we have used that extensively. That's been very helpful to us. It's also helpful for teaching volunteers because the pictures are nice and clear. So we have it laminated and we bring it to tours sometimes.
Oh, that's great. We have a next question. Is the goal for the project to have a high % of native plant cover throughout, or is it intended to have patchy and bare areas too?
That's a hard question. I think it's really both. We're not necessarily looking for density throughout. We want to have some bare patches. When it was completely bare, there were some plants that we had more of at first, bug seed and Illinois tumbleweed and winged pigweed or winged pigweed, that we don't seem to have quite as much of now that we have more grasses. We don't know yet whether that's because they like the open area where their seeds spread more freely in the wind, or if it's just been wetter or some other factor has made them less successful right at the moment. We like having some patchy bare areas in terms of the native plants seeding themselves. So I guess the question is, the goal is both, and to just observe carefully. And the main thing that we don't want is a lot of invasive weeds. So our main goal is to pull weeds or get rid of invasives and then let nature kind of take its course in the rest of the areas.
There will also continue to be bare areas adjacent to us in terms of plants because we are right over the fence from the beach volleyball area. So that essentially is a bare sandy area. And there's also a swimming beach right near us.
And the city rooms it.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. And let's take, I'm curious about this. Have there been any studies on what type of habitat the beavers would build and if that would be good for birds? And that, I think, goes to a point that, you know, Joan mentioned in her part about sort of working more broadly with the landscapes around, with the university and with the community.
Well, it's all very artificial because the beavers live in the lagoon that was part of the northwestern lake fill. They have a small lodge, but the area around it is mowed by Northwestern's groundskeepers. The beavers were able to get out and are looking at trying to find other areas to harvest for food. But as far as their interaction with it's not, the beavers are not creating new habitat. In a more wilder place, they will dam a river and create new wetlands. Here along Lake Michigan in Chicago, they don't have that opportunity. We're truly amazed that they live here, that they've been here for so long, and that they've and they've just sort of been discovered more recently. And certainly they affected us more after they took down so many of our cottonwoods. And we then decided that we really needed to reinforce our fencing and wrap our trees so that our cottonwoods and some other trees, so we wouldn't lose them to the beaver.
Wonderful.
I want to make one more comment, if I may. There was a question of bird collisions. Evanston has a very, very active bird collision monitor group that during migration goes out and checks the tall buildings in Evanston and also several buildings at Northwestern. And because of their efforts of picking up, hopefully sending birds that are just stunned off to Notibart, but collecting the dead birds and presenting them to authorities at Northwestern, and they have been appalled, and they are starting on a project to make their campus much more bird friendly. And the birds that we collect go to the Field Museum that are dead, go to the Field Museum for their collection. But it is a concern.
And I know we're just about out of time, but as far as the partnership with other sanctuaries, we consulted when we started having this problem with the beavers. I called up Leslie Boris, wrote to her, and she said, "Oh, well, we have beavers this year too, but they don't have a lodge, and they're taking out some
cottonwoods, which
not cottonwoods,
sandbar willow.
Sandbar willow that was invasive there, so she figured that they were helping out on the weeding. So it's an ongoing discussion and learning opportunity for us. This is our first year of it being a problem. Before they were just cute.